You're listening to Trek FM.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
There was a little bar in Mill Valley where all the Starfleet trainees used to go.
The 602 Club.
You know it.
I was there more times than I can remember.
If you kill him, all this be mine.
Welcome, everybody, to the 602 Club. We're so excited to be back for you this week. And with all the supplementals going on, we still have a main show to do. And I'm really excited to be back this week because we are going to be talking some more Bond, as this year is the year of Roger Moore. And we will be wrapping up Roger Moore this year and then heading on to Dalton and Pierce next year. So super excited about that. But here, we're going to be talking about A Live and Let Die. And if you've been listening to the shows, you know that I can't do this alone. I have some incredible guests that are going to be back today. And with us, as she's going to be, she got herself into this, so it's her own fault. Christy Morris. Hey, Christy, how's it going?
Hey, Matt. Hey, John. It's awesome. Thanks for having me back for another. Although it's Roger Moore, not one of my favorite people, but it's not his fault.
You know what? That's so funny. You're absolutely. You know, he's not my favorite Bond, but he is the nicest person.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Anytime you see him
in,
yeah, when you see him in interviews, like, you know, because he's like a UNICEF ambassador and everything. Like, this guy is an incredible human being. But anyway, you know, you're absolutely right. He's not necessarily my favorite Bond, but that's okay.
And he was in Spice World. So
yes,
come on.
That's true.
Oh my gosh, I forgot that, and I'm a Spice Girls fangirl.
Don't you dare forget that.
But I had to say, I got my glass of foo yuck ready.
Good.
Talking.
Oh, good. Excellent. And as everybody can hear, the dulcet tones of the one and only. And if you're following him on social media these days, you might think his own supermodel, Sean Champion.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Matt. Really appreciate it. It is great to be here tonight. I'm so glad to see both of you and talk to you and talk about a movie that I think might be a little bit misunderstood. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion of The Man with the Golden Gun.
I am too, with that kind of introduction from you, John. I can't wait to dive in. Before we do, just want to remind everybody, you can find all the shows that Trek FM does over on Apple Podcasts. Now, if you're online, you can just search itunes.com/Trek FM. And of course, if you've got iTunes, you can just look us up there. But we've got so many different shows for you to check out, so make sure you do. We're a featured provider there. We're very blessed for them for featuring us as a podcast provider. And so you can also check us out on Twitter at TrekFM, Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And we have our listeners-only discussion group. That's called the Babel Conference. That's on Facebook. Now, if you're on Facebook, in that search field, type Babel into that search field. You'll pull us up. If you're on our website at trek.fm, hit discussion on the menu bar, and that will bring you right over to the group. And last but not least, if you ever just want to send in your thoughts about the show and you don't necessarily want to put it on Facebook or somewhere else, you can go to trek.fm/contact, choose a show, choose the 602 Club, and that'll come to me and the host that week, and we can interact with you that way if you want to have a more private or long-form discussion. So, well, guys, what is so interesting is diving into the history of Bond as we're continuing Bond. I keep finding that the movie that comes up, I'll watch it, and I'm watching the extras, and I'm reading behind-the-scenes stuff. That movie was actually usually seems to have been planned like 3 movies beforehand, but that didn't ended up working out. And actually, they were filming You Only Live Twice, and their goal was actually to make The Man with a Golden Gun. And in fact, they even had invited Roger Moore to play the role. So things could have been very different if that had worked out. And the main reason was they were going to use Cambodia as a filming location, and there was an uprising there, and it just led it to being completely impractical. So they cancel that, and we get on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So I had a question for you guys. I wanted to do a little bit of thought experiment here. If they do The Man with the Golden Gun and Roger Moore is Bond, we never get Lazenby, how do you think On Her Majesty's Secret Service plays out with Roger Moore? Because we talked about that idea if Sean had done it, but do you think that works at all with Roger Moore and kind of the way he ends up playing Bond?
I don't think that it would have worked personally because of the way that they take the character into, much more of a, I think, a sensitive role, and, ends up, getting married and wanting to possibly quit being Bond. I think that Roger Moore really plays more of the, Bond that's never going anywhere, really not interested in settling down kind of guy.
That's a really interesting question. I think that Roger Moore's maybe only advantage here is that, he's older than Sean Connery, but looks younger than Sean Connery, particularly at that time.
Yeah,
if you're talking
absolutely.
about like 1968, 69, when OHMSS was made. So I think his advantage in that would have been that, like Lazenby, he would have come across as very young. And I think that's something you can buy with Lazenby in that role, the way that love story is written. And I think you can also buy Roger Moore falling in love, maybe more so than you could Sean Connery. But the difficulty here is that we know that when Roger Moore came into the role, he wanted to lighten things up. And that it was sort of the actor meeting the script and then the script meeting the actor. So they found this vein that they wanted to hit with that version of James Bond as opposed to the version that we got with Connery. So I don't know if we would have bought it as an audience, kind of the serious undertones of OHMSS, and then certainly the end of that movie. So that's really tough. But then you have to ask, okay, if that would have been Roger Moore's first outing, and he was sort of still young and fresh, and the Bond series was something different at that moment, would they have found the right balance? Would they have been able to kind of mold the role to fit him? I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a question for an alternate history. If we can, go back in time, that's a tough call. I think he has some advantages there, but I don't know if we would have bought it.
The question that I come to is, at that point, does Roger want to change the role the way he does when he does come on in Live and Let Die?
Right. And, a 30, say like a 36, 37, 38-year-old Roger Moore might have different feelings about than a 45-year-old Roger Moore.
Right.
He's newer, younger, fresher. He's just off the Saint and maybe just glad to have the gig. Well,
and I'm thinking that, if you do The Man with the Golden Gun, then it actually might be a slightly more serious movie than you get with what we do get. And then if you do that, you could flow into On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And this is the thing. As Moore plays Bond, his style, as he's older, he gets the role, it becomes his, he makes it his own. I don't think that On Her Majesty's Secret Service plays well for him. But thinking back, doing the thought experiment with After You Only Live Twice, it's The Man with the Golden Gun, and then OHMSS, I actually think it could have worked, but mainly because I don't necessarily think that he would have changed Bond as much. I wonder if he actually might have made Bond a little bit more serious again and gone with that kind of early Dr. No type feel instead of maybe a little, and this is, again, I'm just totally speculating, but it just created this really interesting idea because it's so strange to me that so many people that come into the Bond world are people that floated around the Bond world for a long time and were at one time or another already going to be Bond. It happens with Roger Moore. It ends up happening with Pierce. There's just lots of different ways in which the Bond universe works. And one of those things is that a lot of times the guy who ends up playing Bond, well, he's not going to play him now, but he'll play him later. And so I thought that was, I don't know.
I mean, well, I'm going to throw out two more weird factors here. Okay, so one factor to consider is style. And I know that this shouldn't really matter, but look at our reactions to Diamonds Are Forever. Okay, so that's a movie where you came off of this incredibly cool, charismatic actor, Sean Connery, looking like $1 million in his first few Bond movies, and it just so oozes this sense of 60s adult cool. And then you get to 1971, and it looks like a cheap cop movie made for TV, right? Roger Moore in 1968 may have a very different look from Roger Moore in 1974, you know? So even then, that might be a factor that sort of would change our perception of who this guy is and the world that he lives in. But by the time you get to the mid-70s, well, and look at Live and Let Die, it's just a strange-looking movie, particularly for a Bond movie. The other factor to throw out is this. Man with the Golden Gun was Ian Fleming's last Bond book, and it bears almost no resemblance to this movie at all. In fact, there was some weird controversy, which I think has been settled now, but there was a weird controversy about how Fleming didn't actually finish Man with the Golden Gun. By most accounts, he did. Like I said, I don't think that's a controversy anymore. But basically, you have the name Scaramanga and, very little else that is directly reflected in this movie. So had they made that movie, and had they made that with Roger Moore, may have been a totally different thing. Again, it's a parallel universe akin to the mirror universe in Star Trek. Just bears very little resemblance to what we know.
Yeah, that is a funny thing, because if you read a lot of the Bond books, you're like, wait, this is only the name. They really just took the name.
They're like, yeah, all that's crap. We're changing it.
Yeah.
But I like that you both added that perception, and that's why I think, like Matt said, it's worth discussing this experiment, because I was thinking of Roger Moore as he is in Man with the Golden Gun, and how that age and everything with his style would play in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I didn't think about if he's younger, if he's just starting out, how he might do it completely differently. I totally get what you're saying with Connery in the beginning, and then in Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah. Or at that other universe, it would be The More That We Know, and you plug him into that movie, and then we don't have any more podcasts to do because the series died. So
yeah, that's true. That act, yeah, ooh. Well, and that's so interesting too, because there's such that internal struggle that does end up happening with OHMSS, in the fact that it's not quite the hit that they want. It's not a bad movie. It doesn't do horribly on any shape or term or anything like that. Look, it's just not a bad movie in the sense of box office. It's just not what they're used to. And, of course, with everything that happens with George in the first place, him saying he's not going to come back before the movie's even really out, it turned into a mess. So it could have ended up that way. And then they get Roger to come in, and he becomes that kind of very steady person. I mean, he becomes the rock with which they built a whole new Bond on, and the interesting thing about going through this way, John, one of the things we've talked a lot about is the idea that, there really are iterations of the character, and, each person who plays Bond brings something different that adds to the character, and then they make it their own, and it's the same character, but it's different, and that's just the kind of the way it is, and love him or leave him, Roger Moore created a foundation for them to build a lot of movies on, because he was so rock steady as a person.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the business of Bond, you really couldn't ask for a better thing. Now, as far as the art of Bond, it's so subjective, and I have a lot of friends who fall very firmly into one camp or another. And it's not that I'm afraid of picking a side in any of this, but I kind of look at it like a Shakespeare play. Laurence Olivier can play Henry V. Kenneth Branagh can play Henry V, and a lot of actors in between can play Henry V. And every time you see Henry V, there's something new, different, some sort of nuance is brought to that role because you're seeing somebody else interpret that story the way they want to interpret it. And it's not just the actor, it's also the director, and it's also the set designer, and it's everybody else involved who wants to put sort of their spin on what you take away from that performance. So I'm really good with people reinventing. I mean, hey, we're on Trek FM. If we want to talk about reinventing franchise, reinventing stories with different actors, we do not need to look any further than probably every other show on this network, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And hey, they're about to reinvent it
Sure
all over
are.
again
Yeah.
soon. So one of the quick behind the scene things that happens, and I totally forgot this, but this is the last picture that Broccoli and Saltzman actually produced together. And that is because Saltzman needs to sell his share of Eon Productions because he has quite a few financial problems. And so the film franchise goes into the hands of just Broccoli from now on. And, I wonder, and I don't know how much that hurts the films coming. But I guess that might be an interesting question as we look at those films down the road, if there's anything that we felt like is missing at all. I'm going to say no for the next one. I'm going to answer that question right now because it's The Spy Who Loved Me, and there's nothing missing from that movie because it becomes, I guess, the quintessential Roger Moore film. But that was an interesting thing that I forgot had happened behind the scenes in this one, that they had to dissolve their partnership after this. And not because they wanted to, but just because Saltzman felt like he didn't have any other choice.
And it sounded like it, like you said, it wasn't really his fault. It just was a bad time period. And he ended up being a person who ended up having a lot of debt all at once and had to get rid of it somehow.
Really interesting part of James Bond movies. And John, I love that you brought this up earlier, that a lot of times that they have very little to do with the book other than some names and then the name of the book. And part of that is location, and that in the movie, most of this story takes place in Jamaica, but, they've already been to Jamaica a few times. And so one of the parts of writing a Bond movie became, okay, so where haven't we been that's really exotic, and how can we put Bond there? So it's not so much about story points. Like, you can have, the characters be in any different, part of the world, but we just want to go somewhere cool, like that people want to go. And that's really part of, especially that older Bond movie formula. And I was really interested in some of the places that they wanted to go because, wow, I'm not sure how that would have played out. I mean, Beirut, Iran, some really interesting choices that they first had.
Well, and, remember, though, in the late 60s, early 70s, Beirut was a really cool place. I mean, that was like, it'd be like going to Dubai now. You're going to like a really cool, really wealthy place. So I can see why they would want that, and they still kept that little hint of it in there. And Iran, it could have been fascinating. What's interesting to me about the locations in this, you have a perfect example of a location in the previous film not working, and a location in this movie absolutely working. Now, Bond very often we think takes place, Bond stories we think take place in this sort of rarefied, very glamorous world, right? And we've seen a lot of that with Connery, and we see a lot of that in the later Bond movies. But Live and Let Die starts in Harlem, and Bond is very out of place. But there was part of me that wanted to like that because he was in this very real world, very tangible place that you can kind of relate to. Like, you can just go to New York. For all the people who are listening in our American audience, it's relatively easy to get to Harlem and walk around in those locations, right? And in this, you're in an exotic location, you're in Thailand, but it doesn't feel like this incredibly overwrought, removed, sort of gilded version. The hotel is beautiful. that set for the hotel is incredible. But all the stuff in the streets, all the stuff out there was sort of everyday props and real people on the streets. That's an example of that kind of location really working where it didn't work in the last movie. So I'm glad that they made it exotic, but they also made it sort of real world, livable.
Yeah, that is something I hadn't actually thought of, because there's something about the way that these locations work, and it feels more like a Bond movie. I mean, we end up in places we'll go back to, like in Skyfall, Macau, and things like that. But there's something I think about the Far East that so many, especially people in the United States and the United Kingdom, we haven't gotten a chance to visit, and therefore it feels otherworldly to us. And yet, like you said, when they're in those canals, it's just those people's lives. It's just where they live. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's just the floating market. And it's a super cool place, but it's also just where those people do business every day, and like you said, it feels very down to earth. And yet at the same time, it's heightened because James Bond is there, which is interesting because there's something about, say, Vegas or Harlem at that time period that even Bond isn't able to heighten. And maybe that's because as Americans, we are too familiar with the problems that were happening in our country to make it be like, oh man, Harlem, even Bond can't make that cool at that point.
Yeah.
There's so many problems there right then, and so I think our divorcedness from how far away that they are is what allows us to do that. I don't know, maybe I deconstructed that too much, but that was just something I was thinking of while you were talking. I wanted to ask you, John, because I know that you are a ship aficionado and you love ships. And one of the big things here and why they chose Hong Kong, they loved the wreckage of the Queen Elizabeth and the idea of using that for a base. So give our listeners a little behind the scenes of what happened to the Queen Elizabeth, because it is such a cool set.
This made me so excited as a kid. It makes me so excited now. So I'm just going to derail the show for the next 45 to 55 minutes, and we'll just talk about that.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So here's what you need to know about the Queen Elizabeth. Launched in 1938, a couple of years after the Queen Mary. As many people have said, the larger, more perfect of the two sister ships. It was indeed at the time the largest ocean liner in the world, and absolutely beautiful. But you want to hear a cool story. So in 1938, when the Queen Elizabeth was to start sea trials, and now sea trials don't last that long. You have a minimal crew on board. The ship is not fitted out yet, right? But remember, it's 1938 off the coast of England, okay? And what happens? They get out to sea a little bit. The captain opens his orders, and it says, "This is not a sea trial. You head full speed to New York." So the first mission of the Queen Elizabeth was to go to New York and get fitted out for war. And nobody had any idea that this was happening. This was under top secrecy, right? So the Queen Elizabeth didn't actually get fitted out and start passenger service until the late 40s, until after World War II. And then had a fabulous career after that. Look up pictures online. It's a beautiful, beautiful ship. But by the late 60s, when the Queen Mary was retired, then the very next year, the Queen Elizabeth was retired. We thought the Queen Elizabeth would end up in Port Everglades in Florida as sort of a floating tourist attraction, like the Queen Mary is today in Long Beach. That didn't last long. She was purchased and turned into Seawise University. So it would have been this massive ship that would be a college university to go study on board and live on this incredible vintage ocean liner, right? And under some very mysterious circumstances, she caught fire during the conversion. And during that fire was essentially left capsized in Hong Kong harbor for years and years and years afterward. this wrecked Hulk sat there. Looked very much like the Normandy, the same thing that happened to Normandy in 1941 in New York. And it's just such a shame because it was a beautiful ship that could have had this ongoing career under a different name. But man, does it make for a magnificent set in this movie. I just thought that was the coolest thing. Why wouldn't MI6 have a base there? And when I was watching this again, I was watching it on Blu-ray, and I kept freeze frame. And obviously, they created new sets. It's not an exact replica of what the interior of the Queen Elizabeth looks like. But I love the little details, like obviously the slanted floors and slanted doors. But then they would cut out a section of floor to sort of heighten a room, and it looks magnificent. It's absolutely great.
And even the whole thing looked slightly off kilter when he first walks in. It's like everything behind him is crooked.
Right.
Like
I love the bar.
in a capsized boat.
Yeah, I love that he's walking on one level because they've put on sort of floors so you can walk straight. But then sort of behind him, there's a bar, and there's people at the bar, but it's off angle. You know, like you'd have to crawl your way up there. You know?
Yes. It was one of those things where Bond and the producers just made use of something so unique, and it worked so well for the story, you know, because at that point he thinks he's been captured and he's getting away, and then they're like, "Oh, welcome to the Queen Elizabeth, Mr. Bond," you know. It's fantastic. The fact that you know, and who else but MI6, but to use the Queen Elizabeth as their the mode of operations in the Far East. Just fantastic.
It's funny, though. I'm going to make a recommendation to MI6. So they really need to work on their code phrases and stuff like that. How many times has Bond encountered somebody who he thinks is going to kill him or expose him or something like that, but then it turns out that they're actually an agent on his side? You know, Felix Leiter at first, Tiger Tanaka. You know, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, really, they need a secret handshake or something, so then Bond can be like, "Oh,"
or like a code phrase. You know, I mean,
a code phrase, like, you know, "Yeah, it's rainy today in London," you know, something like that.
But I hear in New York the weather is fine. You know, come on, guys, it's not that hard.
Well, yeah, because when he first walks up to Lieutenant Hip, or when the lieutenant walks up to him, you think that he's going to take him in and that it's all part of Scamander's plan.
Right, exactly.
That's an interesting thing that happens in this movie, is the fact that it's a very different type of Bond film, and mainly it's because we have a very unique Bond villain who turns out to be an alter ego of Bond in a lot of ways. And Scaramanga is Bond's equal for the most part, and somebody who does a very similar job in a lot of ways and creates an interesting mirror for Bond. And I thought, to me, you know, rewatching it, that was actually the most fascinating thing, is the kind of the amoral character who uses that skill that Bond has for his own gain, and the character like Bond who has a belief, a moral system that has him doing this job for a very particular set of reasons. And they have a conversation about that, but I wish it had been played up just a little bit more, because I think that is a truly fascinating theme. And if they obviously done the story today, I think that would be the kind of the crux of the whole storyline. But it makes for what I think is Roger Moore's first good villain. Like, it, you know, I think it creates a very interesting, and it's Christopher Lee. So, I mean, you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add in. Christopher Lee, for me, was the most redeeming part of the movie. I think that he played an incredible villain. I think that the entire time that he's on screen, every single time, he has you captivated because he's so serious. He's very calculating, and that he does have this constant theme of, from the very first scene where he has some guy come to his house and is going through the fun house, fighting him. You suddenly see the wax figure of Bond, and you're going, "Oh, wait a minute." It's like he has this obsession with Bond and either wanting to be better than him or wanting to kill him so he doesn't have competition. That's what I thought of, was that they're both sort of like hitmen in the same universe, and that this guy is so obsessed with being the best that he wants to get rid of Bond.
Yeah, I mean, Christopher Lee, that's inspired to have him in that role. It really is such a good bit of casting to have him there. And I agree with you, Matt, that look at the 2000s Bond, and you have a guy who has some conflict about what he does. This is 1974. It's a different world, and we in the audience are not supposed to question at all what Bond does. But had that conversation played out a little bit longer, I think what's so multi-layered about what Christopher Lee is doing is that he is amoral. He is morally bankrupt. He has this fascination with Bond. He really is seeking approval from Bond, and at the same time is going to kill him. It's an incredible bit of psychology to watch him play, but he's still so cool. And he's so mysterious. I mean, what else can you say about him? It's Christopher Lee.
Well, I mean, and he has a third nipple.
Yeah.
And I got to say, three's company.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
No.
I don't know if it gets much sexier than that. Which I love that they actually use that with Bond pretending to be him, and they just put the little plastic nipple-y thing on his chest, and it's just fantastic.
And then he just starts taking off his shirt and goes, "Hi,
Yes.
fat, it's me."
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly what he does. Absolutely.
They should have given those away as a premium when the movie opened. I think that would have been great.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me say this, though. I love the design of Scaramanga's house. It really, like, there's shades of Dr. No there, but in this sort of
absolutely
amped up 70s way. And if I had the money, I would have a fun room just like that. So, yeah, I think we have to give him credit there.
And that's something that's so interesting, too, because Christopher Lee, as Ian Fleming's step-cousin, and was supposed to be Dr. No. And Fleming had even suggested that Lee be him, and by the time that came out, Fleming, and this is coming directly from Christopher Lee in an interview, he said he didn't always remember things that he was supposed to, and so I didn't get the part then. And I have to say, it's a bit of luck that he forgot, because I think he's a much better Scaramanga. And he kind of would have been kind of wasted with the Dr. No role. He would have been fine. It's Christopher Lee. But I think there's something about him being 6'4", very imposing when he's next to Bond. It creates a just overbearing presence when they're together that, I don't know if many people could pull off. Plus, how many people do you know look that good in a tracksuit like that?
Yes. Good call. Hey, by the way, and if you want me to make another Christopher Lee to Ocean Liner connection, okay, and I think it was 1983 TV movie Goliath Awaits, which was shot on the Queen Mary with Christopher Lee as the twisted young engineer who then turns the wreck of the the Goliath, into his sort of dystopian world in a bottle. It's pretty awesome. It's actually not an awesome movie, but he's awesome in it.
Isn't there a Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode where that's happening too? Where they find this group and they're going away on this ship and they have to infiltrate them. I remember,
Oh man,
I feel like it's like a first or second season episode.
Must be season 2.
But we gotta figure that out. Okay,
I gotta find this.
Sorry about that, everybody on the podcast. If you've never watched the original Man from U.N.C.L.E. show, you totally need to. It's fantastic. So I wanted to ask you guys, because this is something where, as good as I think the villain is Scaramanga, one of the things that kind of gets thrown in for his story is the solar agitator and this whole idea of the energy crisis that's kind of starting to happen in the world at this point. And they kind of tack that on, I feel like, because they never really explain why Scaramanga is after this other than money. but he already has a lot of money because he kills people for $1 million a shot. It doesn't seem like he has a money problem. So is he just bored?
That's a good question. You know, I thought one of the notes that I took was assassinating high fat makes no sense. It's just kind of out of nowhere. Really, did you have to do that? Really? I mean, we know you want the Solex Agitator, but come on. So maybe Scaramanga wants to break out into a new business. Maybe the wealth isn't quite enough. Maybe he needs the rush of power as well. Maybe he's angling to get hired by Spectre or something, because it's not just good enough to kill people. He's maybe the top of his profession when he does that, but he's not in the big leagues yet. He's not in like a position to take over the world. Maybe that's what he
saying
means.
The world is not enough.
Oh,
Scaramanga.
Sit on that one for a while, because I think we could use that again. We could use that somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, because he says to Bond at one point, I it's really creepy, but I learned I enjoy killing people, which is sad. But you can tell that, I mean, like you said, Matt, he doesn't have a money problem. I wonder if he killed High Fat just for the mausoleum joke.
That's good.
He's like, he likes it so much, put him in it.
He had been working on that all day too.
Finally,
like all day.
But yeah, I think it is just he either wants just more power, unlimited power, or he wants to rule the world and everything in it. Because I mean, he has the house, he has money, he's got his golden gun with his golden bullets, and I think he is bored.
Yeah, I mean, he's not quite Goldfinger, the man with the Midas touch, yet. You know, he doesn't have that much, I guess. So maybe he's working his way up to that. You know, he's not. You know, I don't even know if he'd be like number 10 Inspector. Maybe he's like number 12 at this point. He's trying to get to like number 4 on the list or something. I don't know.
It's the loneliest profession. He needs friends. That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
There are a couple of new characters that happen in the movie that, you know, they turn out to be, well, at least one really leaves an impression, and I think that's Knick Knack as the villain's henchman, and a very unusual henchman as well. I forgot how much I kind of enjoy his craziness. Like, if you kill him, all of this will be mine. It's like, oh, that's awesome. Of course the henchman thinks like that.
Yeah. Hervé Villechaize is pretty awesome in this. This is before we knew him as Tattoo on Fantasy Island, and I read that. Yeah.
The plane.
Right. So this was before that, and I read that he didn't have any acting jobs. He was living out of his car when he got this. So it's pretty amazing that he's in this, and he leaves such an impression. He's little Odd Job. And that was kind of the thing. He's got the suit, he's got the hat. Yeah, who talks. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved him in this. I love that, from the get-go, they have him running the circuit board for the funhouse.
Well, and he's getting this perverse pleasure. Like, you can tell he's like, oh, maybe this is the time I kill him.
Yeah, or when he says, oh, no, you can't use the stairs. What are you going to do? That was cute.
My favorite thing is that them talking in the behind the scenes, they're pretty kind to Hervé, but it does sound like he is a horn dog. And he's like out in the brothels and stuff till very late at night when they're filming there in Taiwan. Apparently he came on to Maud quite a few times, which she politely declined. So it's just really funny, and it like, there's so much of like you hear about him behind the scenes where you feel like he just kind of is Knick-Knack. It's great. It's great, and I love the way that he interacts with Christopher Lee's character, Scaramanga, and then of course with Roger Moore as Bond. It is very memorable. It's probably one of the most memorable things in this movie. He's
very good as an actor. He's very good at what he does. And yes, he seemed to live this sort of troubled life, which ended tragically. But I love that he left such an impression in this. He left such an impression in Fantasy Island. And I think it's only right that last shot is him caged, mounted to the mast of that junk. It's, this movie, when Bond plays it poorly, you have a Bond full of jokes. And we haven't gotten there yet, but in Moonraker, when you have a pigeon doing a double take, and I'm sorry, but when we get there in our series of podcasts, that'll be a whole 45 minutes just talking about how terrible that moment is. There are a couple of moments in this movie where clearly they're just going for the joke, and they regretted it, which is interesting to read that in the aftermath. But there are moments with Knick-Knack where he's so twisted as a character that even though they're making a joke, you sort of buy it because he's twisted, because he's off his nut, and he's having a good time at being insane. So it kind of works.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the whole scene where suddenly the figures in High Fat's garden come to life.
Yes,
and Knick-Knack is up on the table with Bond passed out with the pitchfork going, I'm just going to end it now.
Absolutely.
Going, wait, whoa.
Nothing like Mini Poseidon to take you out. So,
yes.
I mean,
yes.
One of the characters that I wish that we had gotten more of was Soon Tek O's Lieutenant Hip. He doesn't get a ton to do, but he seems so fun. Like, and he's got these nieces that are totally kick-ass. I mean, like, they're just, like, they are saving Bond from this martial arts school, which, I mean, that would be a creepy place to wake up. You wake up and here, have some tea, have something to eat, and now you are going to die because somebody's going to take you out.
It's a very inefficient school that they keep killing each other.
Yes.
I mean, I know you want to really sort it down to the best of the best, but it's very inefficient.
You're going to run out of students to teach.
You will. And then your tuition money dries up. How do you run a place? Yeah.
What I love about that scene quickly before we dive back into Lieutenant Hip was the fact that Bond realizes I'm out of my depth. I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. I got to get out of here. And so that he dives out and they come and save him.
Yeah. And you know what? Here's the thing about that scene. So clearly that was a scene inserted because, hey, martial arts movies are hot now. So let's put in a thing like that. But I buy that so much more than feeling like Live and Let Die was a ripoff of all the blaxploitation movies that were hot at that time. There's just something about it that I accept much more. And it fits with the theme, it fits with the location, it fits with the characters. And that's actually a really good fight that Bond has with his final adversary in there, the guy in the black who kind of stands up and he kind of cocks his neck. Bond would have been dead in about a minute, but it's a good fight. It's played out well.
And you can tell that Bond kind of learned from watching them first. Okay, I'm going to do these couple moves and now I'm going to jump out the window.
Yeah, right. Just get out. Yeah.
Well, and it's the thing, this Bond isn't going to win that kind of fight. And knowing when to get out is very important as Bond. That's what keeps you alive. And the fact that he has Lieutenant Hip to save him with his nieces is just hysterical because you are expecting Bond to step forward and like, no, I got this, ladies. I don't want you to get hurt. And then they're the ones who, kick everybody's butt. It's just fantastic.
Look, I'm just going to go on the record right now to say that my last name may be Champion, but there's no cooler name than Lieutenant Hip.
It is very true. I mean, yeah. Would you rather be Hip or a champion?
I don't know. Well, if I could be lieutenant, I think Lieutenant Hip is. Look, it's a
cool.
great rap name. It's a great band name. It's a great album name. I mean, really, you could apply that name to anything.
Well, and that's the thing. You're absolutely right. Hip is better because if you're Lieutenant Champion, then you're only a Lieutenant Champion.
Yeah, see?
Right?
Exactly.
But Lieutenant Hip just sounds
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
I'm
wish
glad we
that
figured this
character
out.
got more time though, because he is so much fun and he's very relatable. As you know, he's driving him to High Fat's house and he says, I just had to pick my nieces up from school. Hope you don't mind carpooling.
Yes, that was really funny. One of the things Bond movies do that I like is those kind of characters, that Bond doesn't do all this alone. Like, he usually does have support. And that's part of being a spy, is you do have a network of people. Yes, you're going to be out on your own sometimes, but there is usually a contact that you can contact if you need help. And I love that, kind of seeing the different agencies work together, whether it's the CIA or the Chinese intelligence agency that we'll see, maybe in like Tomorrow Never Dies, that kind of stuff. It's always fun to get to see the other secret agents from the different characters. Or, hey, we might even see a KGB agent next movie. I don't know. Talking about that KGB agent leads me to talk about the fact that this movie has 2 Bond women, and both of them are Swedish models.
Hey,
that's really interesting.
In a perfect world.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to be a Swedish supermodel.
Right,
so.
right.
This is the thing that's so interesting to me, because it's a very different world back then, where Britt Eklund, her desire and goal in life is to be a Bond girl.
Yeah, right.
And she has no problems with the idea of being a Bond. Like, she wants nothing more than to be a Bond girl. And I think that's fascinating to me. And I wanted to discuss that just a little bit with both of you and ask you specifically, Christy. Like, what do you think is different about that, where for her there isn't that connotation that it bothers her? Like, it's a high honor to be a Bond girl.
I think that it would be considered a high honor in the sense that it's this tradition now that's gone on for a while. And, although, it could be played either as always just a second to Bond and he doesn't care about them, that they're usually very assertive, strong women that at some point in the movie either interact with him in a crucial scene or, the main Bond girl in the film is usually not the sacrificial lamb. I feel like there's oftentimes 2 of them, like in not Live and Let Die, but Diamonds Are Forever. We had Plenty O'Toole that got killed off, but Jill St. John stayed on. And even though she had that terrible scene with the machine gun at the end, still in general, she was very like, Bond, don't worry about this. I've got it. And I think that is something to aspire to. I would love to be a Bond girl, but I don't think that that's happening.
Well, their loss.
Yeah. So,
Exactly.
I think it's a great idea.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, first and foremost, actors want to work. So, wherever
That's
the work
true.
is, they want to work. And Mary Goodnight had been a recurring character in the Bond books along the lines of a Moneypenny. So I can see where an actor would lobby to have a role that should have carried on. I mean, what if Mary Goodnight had been around for this and The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker and, maybe a couple more? Then we would be talking about Britt Eklund in the pantheon of the Bond characters like M and Moneypenny and Q. That would have been a pretty cool thing.
It's interesting that Moneypenny is the one that seems to carry on and they don't take a Bond girl and do that kind of thing with them.
I think that they know, it's sort of like getting rid of Yeoman Rand on Star Trek. I think they figured for the sake of movies and TV, at least the way that they were writing these, that they couldn't have a recurring female character. And that's a shame. And we kind of talked about that at the end of HMSS. Like, well, could you actually carry on with Bond in another movie with his wife. I wondered that at the end of Spectre. I love the fact that it's just so exciting to me to see the camera pull back, and there's Bond and his Aston Martin, and there's Madeline Swan, and they've both survived, and they both are going to carry on. Now we don't know what happens next, but
well, and I was just re-listening to that show actually, John. As we were making because I watched all of the Craig movies, and then I was listening back to our conversation mainly for you and Norm, and I was exactly at that same point, and I'm still at that point. I want Craig to come back and do one more Bond so they can wrap up that storyline, because I feel like it'd be so interesting to have Madeline Swan back. Does she end up dying? What happens? All of those kind of things. But what I would love for them to do, and I think this would be fascinating, have Bond have that kind of on-again, off-again relationship with a woman where they both kind of understand the game. But they have these feelings for each other, and, and I think you're absolutely right to pull out that Mary Goodnight could have been that kind of character. Would have been very interesting to see her have the opportunity to come back and be somebody that, like Sylvia Trench, whenever he's home or whenever they're in the same city, they're going to have a great time together, and they're going to hang out together, and, they might even have some feelings for each other that go beyond, but they can't let it go too far because of the life that they both lead in MI6. Yeah, it was disappointing that they don't do that, because I think she's a lot of fun, and they play her a little too dumb, and it's disappointing that happens.
So I love both of these actresses. They're both gorgeous. They both belong in the world of this movie. There's so much to like, but I hate that Britt Eklund, I hate that Mary Goodnight is played dumb. And as not just dumb, but the butt of the joke. Yeah.
Literally the butt of the joke.
That's not cool. And I love Maud Adams. She's abused in this movie. The character is abused, not Maud Adams, but Miss Anders is this sad case. And I know that that's what the role calls for, because that is why she's trying to escape Scaramanga, and that is why she's just, stuck in this horrible position. But again, that's the thing that would be written very differently 40 years later, where you give her a little more strength, a little more backbone. It's painful to see her get pushed around by Scaramanga. It's painful to see her get pushed around by Bond. And I know that Roger Moore was uncomfortable with that scene. It feels a little gratuitous to just say, we're going to toughen up Bond by making him twist her arm.
And honestly, for me, the arm twisting didn't bother me as much as the slap.
Yeah. Oh, here.
That felt to me like an abusive husband situation. Like, it was just weird. And it felt too gratuitous to me too, because it didn't feel like a scene where it was two agents fighting each other kind of thing, like in an action movie. It felt just very one-sided of Bond one-upping her, and it felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting is that if you wanted to see it done right, you need to watch Skyfall, because who that character is Severine. Severine is Maud Adams' Andre Anders here, who has the agency to know that the going against the bad guy is probably going to get her killed, but it's her only way out. And it was disappointing to see Bond take the abusive route when he didn't need to. She's telling him the truth. Yeah. He should be able to figure that out from her complete fear all over her face. So yeah, I think it's interesting because, there's like you said, Christy, there is a difference if she is another female agent, like for something like the KGB or something like that, somebody who you might have to get rough with. That's a completely different story to a woman here who has gotten caught in the middle of a man, she probably didn't know who this was until it was too late, you know? And that's not really her fault necessarily. So, yeah, I think the way that it's handled here for both of them is disappointing. Maud Adams will get to come back in a Bond movie that Octopussy. And she was the only woman who will play two different Bond women in two different movies. So, here for her. But it is frustrating because I like both of them. They don't get necessarily serviced by the story well, and part of that specifically is the way that they pray Mary Goodnight, that she's just such a bumbling idiot. And that's like, but she works for MI6.
How did she get that job?
Right.
Can you at least, how does she get that job? And can you at least say that, she's somebody who normally is behind a desk, so we kind of give her that out. So that it's, she's thrown in way over her head. Nobody would be this good, And then, yes, to make her butt the literal butt of a joke because she almost kills Bond because she's not paying attention to where her butt is in the scene is too much. It's just too much.
And something I wanted to ask both of you was, did the scene bother you when she gets pushed into the closet and Maud Adams comes in? And you're like, no, they're not going to do that. Okay, well, they did.
Yeah, they did. They did. Yeah, a little not cool. I mean, the front door was right around the corner. So she's got her own room, I think. It might be a little humiliating to go have to get another key from the front desk, but it's less humiliating than hanging out in a closet.
And they make you feel
while
like,
they do it.
Right, and they make you feel like Goodnight is his girlfriend almost because of the way that they talk with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So especially from the standpoint of thinking you're in a relationship together and then you're listening to him sleep with someone else outside the closet.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
What's so interesting is the way in which Roger Moore's Bond is the most dismissive of women.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
He just seems to... And somebody even calls this out to him in the movie. Like, I know how you like to waste your time. Like, to him, sex is just a way to waste time. It has nothing to do with connecting with anybody. You can understand maybe in context of Tracy dying how he would totally divorce himself from that. But it's just the way that it's played. Like, women are these disposable toys to be enjoyed. And then, and so, yes, it becomes this ridiculous over-the-top male fantasy. I've got one girl in the closet waiting for me while I screw the other girl. And it makes you, unfortunately, uncomfortable when it doesn't have to be like that.
And he becomes less likable, and you're just kind of like, what
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you're right, because you called out that scene with him and Andrea Anders and the kind of abusiveness of that scene for no good reason. It doesn't have to be like that. And it does seem to be, I don't know. I don't know if we can just say it's the 60s or in the 70s attitude.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. You can't even cut them too much slack for this being 1974. 1974 is still after the feminist revolution of the 1960s. It's after, a sea change in the way that women are portrayed in media. And granted, in 1974, there's still a long way to go. In 2017, there's still a long way to go. But this feels like a huge step backward even for then.
And I think, too, like, and I don't want anybody, please don't, like, we obviously love parts of the characters and their portrayal and everything. I don't want anybody just to hear us complaining about it, things we can't change because it was, that long ago. But I think it is right to point out the things that were good and the things that aren't so good. And as you just said, John, even for that time period, you would hope that they might have been a little bit more self-aware.
Because we've seen it before. We had Pussy Galore 10 years before this movie.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think back as we talked through those early Connery movies in the way that, women were treated. I even think of From Russia with Love with Tatiana, who is an agent and everything, and her relationship with Bond, and that they kind of have this relationship that forms and all. And yeah, it seems like there was more respect then than you get later on, which is kind of strange. And it won't come around again in the respect sense till much later. So, I got to ask you guys about this part of the movie that happens where I just feel like there's too much Sergeant Pepper.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
I don't even know if it's him and his Lonely Hearts Club band that I'm not digging. But why did they feel like they had to add him into this movie? Because as we just talked about with the Bond women, and there's some disappointment there. Let's just be honest. He's not funny. He adds nothing to the story, and everything he says is so racist. It's just it's painful to watch because he ruins all of those scenes.
This is what I was saying before. It's a difference between a Bond character or a moment finding a joke or finding humor, and a Bond character or a moment going for a joke. Just grabbing the joke because they can, manufacturing it. And that is what J.W. Pepper is all about, and it hurts. Now, here's the thing. I would have forgiven them if in the boat chase, and you have all these tourists in the boat, and if he had said something entirely less stupid, but at least he's there, and you acknowledge, like, oh, he still exists in this world, and isn't it funny that Bond is in another boat chase, and he recognizes, even for a split second, hey, that's the... But then you cut away. Then you absolutely get out of that, and you do not come back to it again. Done.
Just have him go, wasn't I in a boat chase before?
Yeah, just that look, and then you're done. You get out of there.
Absolutely. You called
But
it.
I do have to say, though, when I first saw Pepper come back on screen, I did die laughing and said, they brought Pepper back? They brought Pepper back.
Of all characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you called it, John, is that, look, even with food, you don't add too much pepper.
You don't. Yeah.
Even with, and if it had just been one scene, but then they kept adding him into more and more scenes into that part of the film, and it was so frustrating. And then the action there seems so familiar because we've already just done a boat chase, and now we're doing another boat chase, and I have to say, this one is not exciting.
Yeah. It needed to last much shorter, just because, like, the joke of it, or the interesting part of it is, they don't have these massive power boats that can cross land, The joke is it's these tiny rickety things that are not built for chases. But then you've established that, then get out of it. Move on. All that needs to happen is that Bond chases Scaramanga, and Scaramanga gets away.
But there was one redeeming part of this, a gem that I found that I thought was interesting. Apparently, when I was looking through all of the cars in the movie, they had it was the AMC Hornet that they were in, did the flip across a bridge over the water. And apparently there was so much effort by everyone on set that went into doing that scene, and that it was all done in one take.
For real. I love it.
That was unbelievable.
Yes.
And I liked the car. I just didn't like Pepper in it.
Right.
Yeah, can he like fall out as they do the flip?
Oh,
that would be great.
Oh, man, that's a great rewrite.
No.
See, now that's the joke I want to see.
Yeah.
You're absolutely that car flip is so perfect, and then they ruin it with a pen whistle.
It was horrible.
Yep. Another moment that both John Barry and Guy Hamilton said that they regret. And
Really?
I agree with their regret. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you can have enough regret for that, but you should. And you should carry that with you in fact, you should do a special edition and edit that
good
out.
Good call.
Just George Lucas that crap. Because it's frustrating because that is such a pivotal Bond moment there. Like it just and it is everything that made those Bond movies cool at that point in time, because they were doing all of these stunts for real. And when they talked about that, they created a computer program specific, and at least back in the 70s. So we're not talking today's computer. I mean, we're talking like it looks like original Tron. With the lines and just to get everything just right. And then they had to engineer the car specifically. They had to actually widen the car, and everything had to be centered and just perfect. And yeah, they do that for real. In one take, there's no CGI. It's just a guy and a car flipping over. It's amazing. And so, yeah, and then it's ruined in the final product because you take away the magnificence of what just happened for real with a cartoon penny whistle, and you're like, oh, facepalm moment, big time. Well, I wanted to ask, as we're kind of wrapping up, what did you think of the theme song, "The Man with the Golden Gun," by the singer? We got Lulu here doing it, and I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence, so I'm wondering what points you guys have that might sway me.
For me, it was kind of forgetful. Forgettable. It didn't seem to be a really powerful song. It just kind of told you what you already knew, you had seen in the scenes before. It's a guy that has a golden gun, and they repeat it over and over. Yeah, it was boring to me.
So here's where you're still going to be on the fence, because I'm going to take the opposite approach, and I'm going to say I actually love it. I really do. Remember when we were talking about Live and Let Die, how the soundtrack is this like funked up 70s version of Bond, and the edits don't always work in the movie, but the soundtrack on its own really works. And to me, it's sort of like, okay, they're staying funky, but now they've decided to put in this strong female voice again, like they had done with classic Bond, like having Shirley Bassey before. So it just kind of works, man. I mean, when I listen to a Bond compilation disc, and there are certain songs that I know I will skip over, that's not one of them. So I'm on board with it.
That's so interesting to me because, I'm totally the one that, like, I don't even remember the song at the moment. It's just not memorable for me. Whereas Live and Let Die, I've heard on the radio.
Sure.
The man with the golden gun. Yeah, that's all I remember is that. So I guess I'm really kind of just in the middle. I think it works better for the actual film than it actually does as a song. And that happens in the Bond movies. I think the Spectre song is like that. It works better in the context of the movie and the credit sequence and everything that it's doing there than it necessarily does as a song that I want to listen to beyond that. I think this one is serviceable. And I don't think there's, John Barry's back with the music. And I think the music actually just fits. It feels like it's more the acoustic wallpaper for the movie. Than something that really stuck out to me in Live and Let Die, where he was definitely trying something funky, and I think it's good here. So it's not a complete standout in any way, but it's not detracting or hurting or anything like that, which is always good. I'd rather just have a soundtrack be there than something that takes away from the experience of the movie. So that definitely doesn't happen. Which leads me to ask, okay, so we've kind of talked through the movie and all this behind-the-scenes stuff and everything. I'm really interested to see how this falls down on the rating scale for you. And Christy, what do you think?
I decided after everything to give it, I originally said 4, and now I'm saying 3. 3 what, though? 3 yuck drinks. That's going to be my thing.
Out of 5?
Out of 10.
3 out of 10.
For me, Christopher Lee redeemed it a lot. And seeing him a lot younger than as Count Dooku, he was such a presence and really played a great villain. And I loved his weapon. But a lot of things in the film detracted from it for me. Not that I thought that Roger Moore was a terrible Bond or anything like that. He does have likable things about him, but the abusiveness feel of the scene with him and Maud Adams, and then later the scene with, having the two of them in the same room, that fell down for me and made me a little annoyed. And then that they gave that dinner scene with him and Goodnight, where she does kind of give him a tough time and say, women are disposable to you. I'm not going to play your game. And then she comes back and says, but please love me. It's kind of upsetting too. So yeah, overall, there were things I liked about it, but it was probably one of the lower Bond films for me.
Where are you, John? Because I feel like you're a little bit more on the positive side, maybe.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When we did our last show, I realized that I liked Live and Let Die a lot less than I remembered.
Yeah.
And now we do this show, and I realize that I like The Man with the Golden Gun a lot more than I remembered. There's something about it that, so in terms of plot, I love the tension between Bond and Scaramanga. I love that you're kind of thrown off at first by whose intent really it is to get them together. I think that's a nice little fake out for the audience. Even, if you want to call it the B plot about the energy crisis, the A and the B plot kind of work nicely together, still topical, even if we don't understand the motivation. That's fine. You can still kind of relate to it. This movie feels like the 70s, but in a good way, not like Diamonds Are Forever. The styles are a little more refined. They're a little more settled in. Roger Moore looks good in a 70s suit. He can just kind of carry it off. The clothes on the women are more elegant than they were in Diamonds Are Forever, or there were moments in Live and Let Die, but this is a little more polished. And then we got those exotic locations back that really kind of work here. I also like the detective work in the first half of the movie, where Bond has to go get the slug from the assassination of 002. And that scene was very reminiscent of Goldfinger, the scene in the dressing room in Goldfinger, I thought. And I like where it leads him. I like his meeting with Lauchet with the rifle. All that little step-by-step detective work, putting it together. I add points for things like the Queen Elizabeth, of course, because I'm biased. I'm going to take away big points for J.W. Pepper, for the mistreatment of women here, and for the poor use of humor. But that's a thing that, again, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It depends on how they approach it. I give this movie, if we're going on a scale of 10, I give this movie 7 out of 10 Solex agitators. And I'll follow it up by saying this, because I had this conversation online with somebody who was maybe questioning my taste. And I said this: I have no guilty pleasures. The things that I like, I fully embrace. So I will fully embrace this movie, and it is not a guilty pleasure in the least. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it is what it is. We accept it as early 70s Roger Moore, James Bond. And the last exploration into that, kind of a failure in ways I did not remember it being a failure. This one, they're starting to find their traction again. They're starting to find the game again. So that's where I land on this one.
It's interesting when you compare the first 3 Connery movies with the first 3 Roger Moore movies. And with the Roger Moore movies, they are really having a much harder time kind of figuring out the formula for him than they did with Connery. I think, John, when we talked about Dr. No and From Russia with Love, we really felt like those movies are kind of firing on most of the cylinders already. And they are having a much harder time. Now, when you watch this right after you watch Live and Let Die, this movie feels like a palate cleanser in a lot of ways. It's not half, which is sad to say, it's not half as offensive as Live and Let Die. And And that's one of the things I think that makes it better is in the context. It is a better movie. I think the villain is much more interesting. It could have been even more interesting. And if you let your mind run, it becomes more interesting. All the things we talked about with why you take away points, why you give points. This one is kind of middle of the road. That happens in a franchise this long. But I would say it's more enjoyable to watch than Live and Let Die. And therefore, I'm going to give this, I'm going to fall in the middle of you guys. It's 6 out of 10 accidental butt bumps. So, it really is. It's above average, but it's just above average for a Bond movie. But that's much better than where we were the last time. And I think that there is much more that you can kind of dig into. And as you said, John, the shape is starting to form for the look and the feel of the Roger Moore 70s era Bond. And we're about to hit that stride in the next movie. And they will hit it, and they will hit it beautifully. So we'll talk about that one next time. I don't want to give too much away, but I love the fact that we got, and we always get a chance to really dig into the meat of this Bond franchise, the history, the behind the scenes, everything. And I know that from the download numbers, the fans seem to love it as well. And it's a joy to get to do this. We get to do that because I got amazing associate producers here on the 602 Club. Ken Tripp and Davis Grayson have lovingly been supporting this show through Patreon for years now, and I really appreciate these guys. I also appreciate what they do for the rest of the network. If you look on Apple Podcasts, you're going to see a plethora, and yes, I said a plethora of podcasts that we have here at Trek FM for you, and the cost for those is enormous, and we can't make that happen alone. And so go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and you can see how you can be part of our team. Make sure all of that comes to each and every week. We've got some amazing perks that come to you for different levels, whether it's the Patreon Roundtable, access to exclusive content, or early access to shows even before they get released. Sometimes you can get to listen to them before anybody else. All of those kind of things. Honestly, every little bit helps. And so just go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and you can see how you can join up with us and make sure that all of what comes to you, not just here in the 602 Club, comes each and every week. Now, love having you both on. I cannot wait until we dive into The Spy Who Loved Me soon. We'll be there soon. We'll be there before we know it. But Christy, let everybody know if they want to talk to you some more about Bond online or anything else, where they can find you.
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at More Christy, MORR instead of MORE. And I talk about Bond, Star Wars, Firefly, Doctor Who, Star Trek sometimes, not as much as the other stuff. But yeah, I actually wanted to tell you guys I introduced a new fan to the podcast.
All right.
Yeah, my friend's husband is apparently a big Bond fan, and
excellent.
he said he even had a 007 hat.
Yes.
Nice.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, me too.
What's his name?
Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah,
Welcome to the
Jonathan,
club.
thanks.
602 Club.
Great. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will continue to and enjoy these Bond episodes and many more. Now, John, if anybody wants to find out where you, Mr. International Man of Mystery, is, what's happening these days with you, what's going on, what you're doing, or they just want to talk about, maybe DVD. Wait, nobody has DVDs anymore.
No. Well, Matt, when I'm not hidden away in a secret headquarters somewhere in the East 40s in New York, you can find me online. You can find me on Twitter at DVD Geeks. I know it's a little retro, it's a little outdated, but then so am I. You can also find me, if you want to talk Star Trek, at Mission Log Pod. So missionlogpodcast.com. That's the show that I do for Roddenberry Entertainment, also found right here on Trek FM.
Excellent. Seriously, having both of you on, I really do. As much as I look forward to all the shows that we do, these are so fun and so special, and I love the chemistry that we've created doing these together. And again, thank you so much for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it. We do this because we love it, and we appreciate the fact that you love it. So you can find me on Twitter at MattRushing02. You can also find me here on the network doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Deep Space Nine. I want to mention that we're doing a review contest right now for the 602 Club. I'd love to give away some very exclusive, Christy, you know how exclusive this stuff is, from Funko Pop. We're giving away some exclusive Guardians of the Galaxy stuff that came in their collector's box that you can only get from that. And we've gotten a brand new review. Wanted to thank this reviewer for going in, spending the time. It takes a couple of minutes over there on iTunes to do this. But we got a brand new review here from Jules Verne, 1492. They said, "This is the podcast for all your geeky needs, 5 stars." So thank you so much for doing that. And they're entered into our review contest. So by June 2nd, we're going to have the review contest in. So just get your review in, and hopefully you'll be able to win. And there's a picture on the Babel Conference, or it's been all over Twitter. You can see what you'll win. It's some pretty cool stuff, like a really awesome scarf for Guardians of the Galaxy, things like that. You can also find me on the Nerd Party Network. I'm doing a show called Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, where we talk about Star Wars. It's great. I love that show. In fact, if you kind of want to know more about me and then next week know more about John, we're doing a show talking about how we take Star Wars personally. What it's really meant to us, what it's kind of taught us, where we see ourselves in the series with the characters. It's fun. I mean, and if you want to know kind of who we are in the nitty-gritty, check that out. I also do a show called Owlpost, a Harry Potter podcast with Drea Kaufman, and we're walking through every chapter of Harry Potter, and we're in the second book now, so Chamber of Secrets. Make sure you check it out. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now, you hear?
James Bond is here.